What happens when accelerating climate change forces humanity to transition from conserving nature to engineering and operating it as infrastructure? How does this shift transform political sovereignty, economic value, and the boundary between the natural and the artificial? For most of Earth history, the biosphere functioned as a self regulating system. Carbon, water, and nutrient cycles created interlaced feedback loops that kept conditions stable. But the rise of industrial civilization introduced a discontinuity, a separation between human economic systems and ecological cycles. This separation became known as the metabolic rift, an ever widening gap created by man between the systems of nature. At first, these effects were isolated, but rapid industrialization and urbanization in the 21st century accelerated the rift. Rising greenhouse gas emissions drove global temperature increase, altering atmospheric, oceanic, and terrestrial systems simultaneously. Cryosphere loss, coral bleaching, hydrological instability, and shifting wildfire regimes emerged as visible symptoms of a deeper systemic disruption. These processes interacted and reinforced one another and propagated across connected systems, leading to a global ecological collapse. By the early 21st century, conservation had become essential but insufficient. As emissions increased and feedback loops intensified, efforts shifted from preservation to active intervention. Initial responses were structural: artificial wetlands to absorb floods, artificial reefs to stabilize marine systems, and reforestation at continental scale. But these systems required continuous maintenance and failed to keep pace with accelerating instability. So intervention moved deeper, from landscapes into the organisms themselves. Advances in genetic engineering transformed biology into editable infrastructure. Crops were redesigned for drought, microbes for carbon capture, and corals for warming oceans. At the same time, genetic archives expanded, preserving and even reconstructing lost species. This marked the beginning of the revival race, where nations competed not for land but for the glory of rebuilding the biosphere itself. These interventions scaled rapidly, but without coordination. States, corporations, and research institutions operated independently, driven by competing agendas. At a global level, these fragmented efforts interacted unpredictably. The biosphere remained unstable, suspended between collapse and control. Despite this time of ecological instability, a hopeful new ideology found its footing. Eco optimism fueled the fervor of leading eco philanthropists. They believed that eco engineering could help us create a utopia they dubbed the Engineered Eden. To bring this vision to life, a centralized framework was established, the Global Eco Engineering Council, driven by the idea that the systems of capitalism that had so far created the rift must now be reconfigured to help fix it. It sought to coordinate global restoration efforts by defining functional ecological metrics, concretizing laws, regulations, and incentives around eco engineering. To further these efforts, the biosphere was redefined as shared infrastructure. Critical ecosystems were designated as planetary commons, enabling intervention to go beyond national boundaries. To regulate ecological performance, Geek introduced the Ecological Efficiency Index. Within this framework, ecosystems were evaluated across three variables: carbon sequestration, biodiversity, and radiative balance. This system was supported by the Ecological Surveillance and Evaluation Network Stack, or ESSENCE for short, a global data infrastructure integrating satellites, environmental DNA collection, and sensor networks into a continuous model of the biosphere. Through these frameworks of performance metrics and data collection, ecological processes became observable in real time and subject to evaluation and regulation. Geek defined the frameworks but did not own global resources. Execution was instead delegated to licensed entities under the Corporate Stewardship Act. Organizations were authorized to curate and manage ecosystems, with performance measured through metrics like the EEI. Under Geek regulation, carbon neutrality requirements extended beyond biomes to all emitting institutions. Carbon offsetting became mandatory. All legal entities were required to compensate for their emissions by removing carbon elsewhere, ensuring their operations did not disrupt planetary stability. Failure to comply risked shutdown or being charged with ecological violation. Carbon credits became the primary currency, one unit signifying 1 metric ton of carbon removed from the atmosphere. As offsetting evolved from a formality into a condition for survival, carbon credits surged in demand, becoming central to the global economy. Corporations capable of large scale carbon capture gained strategic advantage, steadily generating carbon credits, which were in turn bought by entities who needed to offset emissions. These corporations then optimized ecosystems for carbon capture in the pursuit of greater profits. This reduced ecological complexity in these carbon biomes. Biodiversity declined and radiative balance degraded. To maintain compliance, some corporations chose to further offset externally, buying from other biome corporations who excelled in the required metrics. New ecological currencies emerged to represent these exchanges: biodiversity credits and radiative credits. Together with carbon, they formed a tri-credit system. Ecosystems specialized by function, and stability was achieved through interdependence across a network of ecological assets. The biosphere now became economically distributed infrastructure. As these paradigms took hold, biological systems became formal assets. Genomes were patented as corporate IP, and organisms were genetically watermarked. Biological cycles and behaviors were regulated through genetic script engineering, turning ecology into function specific infrastructure. These systems became known as licensed biomes, engineered ecosystems operating under regulatory oversight. Their expansion marked the dawn of a new epoch, the Ingenocene, the engineered age, defined by the increasing human design and control of the biosphere. Ecological systems became stratified as corporate stewards optimized them for human needs. Keystone biomes stabilize planetary systems, regulating carbon, biodiversity, and radiative credits to balance the intervention economy. Nested within them, production biomes use these stable conditions and energy flows to generate food, biomaterials, and electricity essential for human survival. These outputs supplied urban areas and powered service biomes, critical eco infrastructure responsible for atmospheric and wastewater filtration, infrastructure maintenance, and habitation in the cities. Urban populations, in turn, immerse themselves in consumer biomes, designer ecosystems built for comfort and recreation. These ranged from wearable microbial consortia that transformed sweat into pleasant aromatic compounds to ingestible microbiomes that reshaped gut biochemistry and enhanced cognitive well being. Together, these layers formed a dependency chain where each biome's outputs became another's inputs, functioning as distinct economic sectors. Waste from cities processed by service biomes is returned to keystone biomes, closing the bionutrient loop, theoretically abolishing the metabolic rift and reintegrating human civilization back into the systems of nature. Though the systems of ecological regulation and control might be heavily structured, in their recesses,
life finds a way.
Organisms often mutate beyond licensed parameters. Behavioral scripts begin to degrade. This process became known as license deterioration. Some ecosystems succumbed to mutation runaway. These became autogenic zones, self-sustaining unlicensed biomes. The unregulated genetic material in these unlicensed zones created a potential for finding novel genes outside corporate ownership. This led to the emergence of a semi-formal black gene market, dealing primarily in unlicensed DNA and biotechnology. DNA hunters emerged as independent prospectors who targeted novel traits from unlicensed environments. These are sometimes bought by corporations and integrated into upcoming licensed systems, or sometimes acquired by third parties and used in unregulated experimentation. These experiments were often conducted by bioascensionists, a radical biophilosophical group who argues that the ecological crisis began when humans separated from nature. Their solution is reintegration through radical genomic transformation, creating the panbiote, a human whose genome crosses the boundaries of the animal, plant, and fungal domains, capable of subsisting purely on sunlight, water, and air. By eliminating dependence on resource extraction, they aim to dissolve the metabolic rift, democratize enlightenment, and end the suffering produced by extractive capitalism. Opposing them are the pragmatists. The heads at Geek who see the rift as inevitable, something not to be closed but managed through quantification and governance, and the heads of the biome corporations who seek to profit by fixing the rift they help perpetuate. The Ingenocene exists within this tension between radical transformation and controlled management. Where does this conflict take place? What does it look like? And who participates at its frontiers?